back to section 2 that deals with the influences on emotional expression. Before we start, I wanted to be clear that people all over the world, no matter their age, their gender, whatever, we all experience emotions. I mean, there's a lot of debate on what emotions are primary or exist in every culture, and I'm not going to get into that one. But we all experience the same emotions. It's how we express them that is very different, and how we express them, the emotions, depends on many different things. First one is personality. This is something that is very forceful. Um, Forceful. It's a very powerful force on how we express emotions. There are, I mean, this is another topic that's pretty much under debate. But for example, when they've interviewed extroverts, they tend to report more positive emotions, and introverts tend to report fewer positive emotions. There's some very interesting work that's been done by Susan Cain. She wrote a book, Quiet. I can't remember the subtitle. The Amazing Power of Introverts, something like that. She also has a TED Talk where, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, where we realize that it has to do with how the people administering the test have defined a positive emotion. Okay, people who are neurotic, people who are very anxious or worry a lot, tend to report more negative emotions. That makes sense. But just because that's our personality, that doesn't mean that we have no say in the matter. That because for example, I am more introverted, that doesn't mean that I don't experience positive emotions, and that's going to impact how I communicate with people and how satisfied I am with that communication. So, uh, people who are shy can use online communication to have interactions with people. In fact, I saw a fun, I can't find it now. I saw a TikTok the other day of a guy who's quarantined, and he saw a woman on the roof of the building next door doing, I think she was doing yoga, and he wrote a message on his drone and he flew it over to her, and they've started communicating online, which, I mean, he's not necessarily shy, but I was thinking that's a way to get the conversation started if you happen to be a shy person. Okay. Culture is a big issue in terms of how we express emotion. In the United States, it is relatively acceptable for a woman to cry in public. If she's upset about it, she gets some bad news, she can cry in public. I mean, we're not happy about it, but people don't say, "Oh my gosh," don't talk to her. I think it's less acceptable for men to show emotion in public. But in Niger, where my husband's from, it is not acceptable to show most emotions, especially negative emotions, in public. In fact, it's changing a little bit, but people don't even cry at funerals. That's your sadness, your grief is something private. So again, we're not saying that people don't feel it, but the cultural rules of how to express it are different. So remember last slide I said, talked about introverts and extroverts. Well, an extrovert has a high arousal positive affect. I feel great. I'm ecstatic. I'm over the moon. And that's something that's valued in the United States. In other cultures, it's low arousal positive effect. I feel calm. I feel serene. And I think that's more along the lines of how introverts feel. That's also something that is more valued in places like Niger and a lot of Asian countries. It's not just culture when we're thinking of different countries, or also when we think of the co-cultures, their ethnicity impacts how we will express our emotion. And that also ties in because ethnicity is also concerned with the individualistic, collectivistic dynamic. That's going to impact our behavior. Like, how do we behave with people in what do we think is an appropriate behavior with our in group, and how do we interact with people who are not in the group? The third one is gender. And remember, gender has a lot to do with culture. So I don't know that this even needed necessarily to be a separate slide, but definitely gender roles, our expectations of how men and women should behave, has an impact on how we express emotions. And as they say, there is some truth to the cultural stereotype of the inexpressive male and demonstrative female, because women seem more likely than men to verbally and non-verbally express a wide range of feelings. Men are more likely to experience what scholars call alexithymia, which is a reluctance to talk about feelings. And this is what can cause problems in a relationship. I thought that cartoon is pretty funny, where the woman says, "If I were a car, you could find the words." Where women, again, I'm making a generalization. So women tend to be more comfortable talking about feelings. Women tend to see that this is an important part of their relationship, and men tend not to. We'll talk about this more in, I think it's the next chapter. In chapter 9, we'll get to this. So, men and women experience the same emotions, but they differ in the way that they experience emotion, or they read emotions, and the difference in the way that they express emotions. The fourth one, and again, I would say this still falls under culture. We have certain conventions, social conventions. So most of the time in the United States, we discourage direct expressions of especially challenging emotions, mostly anger. I think this is, I see this changing, but there is a reluctance to do something that's going to threaten someone else's face, not their physical face, but the image that they're projecting in the world. You don't want to call someone out in public necessarily. If you look at the text box on page 236, they give you some good examples of a concept that's called emotion labor, where basically you are laboring, you are working hard to keep your emotions in check. And this would be firefighters, EMTs, even professors to some extent. I told the story in another class about at one point I had a class that was really noisy, and I just yelled, "Shut up!" Which is not something that a college professor or probably any teacher should do. It definitely made people quiet down, but I think if my boss had been walking by, I would have been very embarrassed, because I should have been practicing some more emotion labor. Okay. Now, again, I always say when we get to this part that I'm a little bit out of my element. You guys know more about this than I do. Social media. Do you think it is true that people express more emotions online than in person? That there's a little bit of disinhibition going on because you're not face to face with the person. You can express, whether it's a positive emotion or a negative emotion, you're much more likely to let the person know how you feel. The textbook also talks about how senders and receivers experience emotions more intensely online. And again, since the extent of my online persona tends to be texting with friends and family, I don't see it. So I would ask you to think about that. One of the things I have experienced, though, is something that's called the parasocial relationships, that we can get attached to fictional characters. There's a great little box on page 237, The Dark Side of Communication, Fictional Characters, Real Feelings, Parasocial Relationships. I know that when I have watched a series on Netflix or Hulu and it's come to an end, I feel like all of a sudden all my friends have left town and I need to find a new group so we can get very attached to fictional characters. And it's not a problem unless we are too wrapped up in uh, in these relationships. And so I would recommend that you reread or possibly read for the first time this text box on 237 to get some ideas of what's going on there. The last point that influences how we express our emotions is emotional contagion, where much like the coronavirus, emotions can be caught. They can be transferred from person to person. Think about it this way. You walk into a room, a group of your friends are there, and they're all laughing, and you have no idea why they're laughing, but you start laughing. So in a sense, you have caught their happiness. Or you're in a good mood, and you see a friend of yours, like, hey, how's it going? And they're talking to you, and they're really negative, and you can feel your good mood evaporating. So it is possible to catch both positive and negative emotions. And they've done studies, and they show that uh, people who, if they put two people together and doing an experiment, they generally, the person who is more positive will infect the other person with some positivity. All right, so this is the end of section 2. Take a break, get some water, run around the house, maybe go outside, and then we'll continue with section 3.